Right, so I've got my Audacity recording, and
Lovely.
that's it. Right.
Okay.
So we'll need to clap, won't we, to synchronise everything?
Nah. I think your cough should do it well enough.
All
That's
right.
a sharp enough noise. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Turning it to keep at last.
Yes.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another edition of Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast that looks at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies either starring about or by pop stars. Another podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for the Geek Show and Byline Times. I also make short films and music videos, and I'm joined this week by
Mick, hello.
Hey Mick. Where can people find you?
Just dossing in other people's podcasts generally. I'm a podcast co-host.
Professionally.
Of unknown address. Nothing aboard.
You have a podcast that you're regularly on. You were just complaining that your co-host had done 2 episodes with other people today.
I know that's true. I know. Yes, I am usually to be heard on the Behold podcast, where we cover the adaptations of comic book hero into other media.
Yes.
The film, sometimes TV, occasionally animation.
Mm-hmm. And it's good. I've been on a few episodes of Behold. I tend to cluster around each end of the bell curve. I've done some of the best films you've covered and Howard the Duck.
To be fair, Howard the Duck is surprisingly high up the pecking order these days.
Pun not intended.
Indeed not. I mean, Howard the Duck can hold its beak up high, while ever Nick Fury, as played by David Hasselhoff, exists.
The Hoff, yes. Yeah, but you keep an eye out for non-comic book related movies, and indeed you brought today's movie to my attention.
I did. I was familiar with the story on which this is so loosely based it's untrue, because I'm a massive fan of the band involved. But it came to me via the unusual source of the BBC iPlayer.
Ah.
Because on there, hidden away, as is much the case with a lot of the gems on iPlayer, is a series of broadcasts entitled 60 Years of Welsh Pop.
Right, okay.
Now, quite a lot of them are genre-based, so they'll be like, Welsh indie, Welsh disco, that kind of stuff. But some of the episodes are devoted to the work of artists. They're hidden in between Stereophonics and Dame Shirley Bassey was Mike Peters and The Alarm.
What a mental image that's conjuring up. I like to imagine it's literal.
So I watched I mean, they're only little half-hour snippets, and they're a bit like a bit sort of like a cut down Welsh focused version of Top of the Pops 2, with the little. It's basically just a lot of archival clips of the artist involved in doings at the BBC, with little pop-up captions saying a little bit. And towards the end of the episode, it mentions the 2004 hit, 45 RPM, by The Poppy Fields,
Yeah.
which was a scam perpetrated by Mike Peters and the Alarm on an unsuspected music press. And it was only, as I was reading the caption, that it said, and was the inspiration behind the 2012 film Vinyl.
Yes. Which is what we are here today to discuss.
Indeed. And that's how I was well aware of the story, not so much of the film Vinyl.
I'm not really that familiar with The Alarm, I have to say.
They are contemporaries of U2, and I always maintain that the Alarm are what you get if pretension doesn't get hold of Bono. Because there's very much a turn left moment occurs around about the time of the Joshua Tree.
Yes.
The Alarm keep bringing out anthemic little clusters of indie rock pop that are just a joy to behold. And U2 do the Joshua Tree and then disappear up Bono's backside.
Yes, we have done Rattle and Hum on this podcast, so I can definitely verify that as a fair assessment of what happened to you two.
So there's a lot of similarity there. There's a lot of kind of agit pop stuff in there on the Alarms albums. Everyone is a rock solid anthem. And it's album after album of rock solid anthems, and they kept on going. That's the key thing. Mike split up the Alarm. The first album, Declaration, is unbelievably anthemic.
Yeah.
Featuring things like 68 Guns, Where We Hiding When the Storm Broke. And then it carries on in a similar vein right through the first 4 studio albums. But in much the same way that Bono sort of paints himself as being quintessentially Irish, with albeit with a cod American accent.
Yes.
Mike Peters is fiercely Welsh, to the point where their 4th studio album, Change, was also released in an entirely Welsh language version, translated by Mike's wife's mum, or nan, one of the two, called Nevid. And you can buy both copies, both versions of the album separately.
Right.
Both sold in equal measure. And in the US, where the Alarm took off in a way that they never really did over here, it was the most requested by the Welsh, by the rock DJs. They wanted to play the Welsh language version.
Right.
Rather than normal. And it all came to a head in about 1991. I think Mike Peters found himself painted into a corner on that typical sort of pop sort of treadmill of album, single, tour, album, single, tour, album, single, tour, and getting pushed around by the record company and going, you've got to release material. We need music. Create, damn you. And he just announced one night on stage that was his last concert with the Alarm. He then had some similar levels of solo success before reforming the Alarm in 2004 and thinking, if we release this quite solid piece of indie rock pop called 45 RPM onto the world today, they'll just look at our 1983 haircuts and go, oh no, boys, we're not playing this on Radio 1. So they teamed up with a young band called the Wayriders from Leicester. And when it came to doing all the NME covers and music press shoots and interviews and stuff. They sent the Wayriders off to do them as part of the pre-publicity for the single.
Mm.
And then the single got played on Radio 1 regularly, got to number 26 in the charts, and it was at that point that Mike and the band went, "It's us!" And that was the story upon which vinyl was based.
I mean, it's an irresistible story. It's very
It is.
easy to see why people wanted to make it into a film, and it's equally easy to see, given what you've said about Mike Peters, why people would obviously cast that noted son of the valleys, Phil Daniels,
Well,
as him.
indeed. And I having watched the film now, I wonder what the production meeting was like, because Mike Peters is heavily involved in the production of the film. He does the soundtrack and score for it, and he also appears in the opening funeral scenes.
Ah,
You may remember that as Phil Daniels arrives at the funeral, he goes up to a couple with their young son. That's Mike Peters, Jules Peters, and their son Dylan Peters.
nice.
Yeah, so they're heavily involved in the production. So I just wonder at which point in the production meeting Mike Peters went up to Phil Daniels and went, "Can you do me a favour, mate? Can you play me as Rock's biggest arsehole?"
And that
Mike,
is the thing.
Mike Peters is a lovely guy. Every time you
Mm.
see him interviewed, he's just a lovely, lovely guy. And a million miles away from Johnny Thunder, from the Weapons of Happiness.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and it is part of the problem. I can easily imagine Mike Peters, from what you've said of him, just giving it the same treatment that Chris Seavey did when John Ronson was writing the film Frank, and just saying, "Don't make a biopic. That's boring as piss. Just make up something that's really funny and entertaining instead." Fine, but
Yeah.
John Ronson is a very good writer who knows exactly how to build a character. The thing is, with Johnny, when people say, "Oh, mate, you're embarrassing, you're a middle-aged failed rock star," nobody. Someone at one point says to him that watching this guy play rock and roll is like watching your parents have sex.
Yeah.
The problem is that every time people say stuff like this, you think, "Yeah, that's fair. It sort of is."
Yeah.
You've disappeared entirely. I just want you to know you've sank into the wall. It's
There we go.
really disconcerting. I mean, now you're doing it on purpose. It won't do it at all. It's really freaky.
Really
Yeah.
annoying. Yeah, and it rankles me because this is the other thing I find is the big difference between the Alarm and
You
U2
too.
is we all remember Saint Bono and he's every time I click my fingers a child dies, but he doesn't stop clicking his fucking fingers.
Yes.
So and he's always involved, he'll jump on a jet plane and attend a concert to fight global warming at the drop of the Edge's oversized hat.
Yes.
But what does he actually do practically himself? Mike Peters, we went to an Alarm gig about 5 years ago up in Newcastle,
Yeah.
and before we walked through the door and were greeted by the usual overpriced merch and overpriced beer, we were given information on blood cancer.
Right.
Asked if we would like to provide a swab so that we could be entered on a donor list. That's actual positive action by an artist inviting a blood cancer charity to take swabs from potential donors at the gig door. And that, to me, is the difference between an artist like Mike Peters and the other so-called good pop stars.
I mean, devil's advocate, I can understand why director and co-writer Sarah Sugarman thought that, making a film about a really nice guy who does a lot of health-related activism was maybe going to be less funny, but the sentiment of it just seems completely out of whack to me.
Yeah, and the other thing is that Phil Daniels portrays Johnny as a proper old school, washed up
Mm,
has-been, whereas
yeah.
in the interim between 2004 and the album's and the Alarm's last main assault on the charts, sort of 12 years earlier,
Mm,
it never stopped. That the Alarm kept on touring. In fact, there's an annual festival down in Wales called the Gathering,
mm,
which is the Alarm plus whoever else he can rope into play for the weekend.
yeah. He
Um,
got the weekend in. That's quite a big signing these days.
oh, I see what you did there. I wish you hadn't, but I see what you did there.
So there's the thing then. If Mike Peters and the Alarm were not on the bones of the Hales at this point, if they were chugging along, having, quite a nice little career, maybe not the highs that were once predicted for them, but they get along, what was their motivation in pulling off this hoax? Because in the film, the weapons of happiness are pretty overtly doing it because they're on their last chance. They don't have any other shot at success.
Yeah. Well, I think this is for me where the fundamental difference in the weapons and the Alarm story differs.
Mm,
45 RPM was the first Alarm single for 12
yeah.
years.
Mm,
In between times, it had been Mike Peters and the Poets. I think it was Poets of Destruction or something like that. He'd done some stuff with the likes of Kurt Brandon and Glenn Matlock called Last Dead Men Walking or something like that. Something like
okay.
that. But regular gigging, regular releases, but not the Alarm.
Mm,
And I think it was the fact that it was 12 years. And the Alarm, when you listen to their stuff, um, certainly the first sort of 4 studio albums,
mm,
feels like it's a moment in time.
yeah.
There is a noticeable progression, certainly in production quality and sort of orchestration from Declaration through to Change. Declaration is very much um, a 4-piece band playing drums and guitars with Mike interspersing it with the harmonica.
Yeah.
Whereas by the time you get to Change, there's strings, and there's a full male voice choir. So there is a
There's a progression
curve,
there. Yeah.
yeah. But nonetheless, even when you're listening to Change, you're still quantifiably and demonstrably listening to the Alarm.
Mm,
And I think that um, when 45 RPM came out as the first Alarm song in a 12-year gap, um, I think there was a genuine desire that they thought the work was strong enough to stand on its own,
mm,
and they didn't want the work to suffer from a dismissive press. Bear in mind, about the time that 45 RPM came out,
mm.
um, if you were over 25, you weren't allowed into recordings of Top of the Pops.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a good policy looking at how Top of the Pops has been in the past, really.
But then sort of 5 years previous to that, I was victim of that policy. In that I used to take my daughter up to watch Top of the Pops being recorded, and I had to go sit in the bar and wait for her. Even though the acts that were playing were like Paul Weller and
Yeah.
yeah, so
It's
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's one of the things that the movie doesn't explore, and I bring this up not because I agree with it, but because I wanted the movie to have a standpoint on it, which
Yes.
is that, pop music has always been an ageist genre, and you can make a
Mhm.
very solid argument that for a lot of its lifetime, ageism was actually a positive force in it. You mentioned Glenn Matlock. You have that glorious generation of British rock in the late 70s who thought, we need to get rid of these dinosaurs in their
Yeah.
mansion. We need to clear them away. And here we've got a film that takes it for granted that obviously a bunch of middle aged men with erectile dysfunction, and thank you, movie, for making me think about Phil Daniels' Stalk On. That was a great moment. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, but it takes it for granted that this bunch of middle-aged men should be in the charts, and the younger generation should sort of sit down and learn from their elders. And you think
Yeah.
that might be quite an interesting, contentious thing to argue if I thought the movie was arguing it. But it just sort of takes it for granted, really.
Yeah. You see, I think the story behind 45 RPM was a great story.
Yeah,
Um, for me as a fan, I mean, this is how much I love the Alarm. The Alarm were the first band I went to actively see live,
right.
rather than just being a band that were playing at a venue I happened to be at. I actually
Yeah,
bought tickets to go see them at Leeds Polytechnic back in '85.
yeah.
So I I was probably one of those few people who heard 45 RPM play on the radio and went, "Hang on, that sounds familiar. I recognise those dulcet tones."
Right. You could have blown the whistle on the whole thing.
I could, and I thought, and again, it had been so long since the Alarm had anything out
Mm,
that I couldn't quite put my finger on who I thought it was.
yeah.
Uh, uh, and then at the end, the DJ said, and that was 45 RPM by young Welsh band The Poppy Fields. I went,
Mm.
oh, not somebody I'm familiar with then. And then the story broke, and then the rest is history. And it
Did
is
it?
a great story.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, what's happened here is the producers of the film have gone, oh, what a great story. Let's make Carry On up the charts.
But not the Beautiful South Greatest Hits album of the
Exactly.
same name, sadly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the casting is instructive. You've got Phil Daniels, who obviously brings all this baggage from Quadrophenia and Park Life. You've got Perry Benson, who is a regular and I think generally welcome sight in low-budget British films, has been ever
Hmm.
since his work with Alan Clark in the 80s. You've got Keith Allen very interestingly cast as the one who's least keen to be a rock star again, despite the fact that everything Keith Allen does, he always seems like he wants it to lead into a career as a rock star, no matter what it is.
Also, interestingly, Keith Allen portraying the one who, until the point of his betrayal of the rest of the band, is the least arsehole.
Yes. Yeah, he's cast wildly against type, is what
Right,
we're
yeah,
saying here, your
yeah.
listeners.
To the point where you almost start doubting, is that Keith Allen?
Yeah. Have they found his long lost brother?
Yeah,
There's a lot of branches of the Allen family.
yeah. So, yeah, and I think, and the other thing for me is that clearly, you're
Mm,
supposed to believe that the record company execs, A, are loathsome because of their goddamn youth,
yeah.
and B, are loathsome because they're absolute assholes. The problem is, if you're going to make the villains assholes, you kind of need the protagonists not to be.
Yes, yeah. It becomes a weirdly hypocritical film in that every arsehole-ish thing that the older band members do is supposed to be great and funny. Every arsehole-ish thing the record company do is supposed to be hissable and evil. And with the younger band, there's almost a kind of schism where when they act like arseholes at the beginning, you're meant to think they're arseholes, but when they're acting like arseholes once the weapons of happiness are controlling their career, you're meant to think, yeah, rock and roll, act like an arsehole at that
Stick it
press
to the man.
conference. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no sort of comfortable. And I thought, I mean, from the point of view of, a screenplay's mechanics, you need a B plot. I thought the
Yeah.
B plot of the lead singer being potentially Johnny's son
Yeah.
was, we've tried out all these hopefuls from everywhere across Wales,
Yeah.
and it turns out he's the son of a Geordie lass.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. Is this set in 2004, or is it just set at the time the film came out, which is about 10 years later?
I don't know, is the honest answer.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember either. Telling that, yeah.
And the shame of it is, I went in wanting to enjoy this film.
Oh, totally. Yeah, same.
Loved the source story when it occurred. Loved the band. I thought the music was great from Mike Peters.
Yeah.
Put into the piece. And I really, really wanted to enjoy the movie. And as you know, I'm a diehard Quadrophenia fan, so that
Of
actually
course.
the inclusion of Phil Daniels for me was a plus.
Yeah.
And yet, this is so much less than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely, yeah. The reason why I mentioned the period setting is because while I think the Alarm's original hoax was quite well timed, because around 2004 there were a lot of skinny jeaned young indie rock bands called The Something or Others.
Yeah.
By 2014, the idea that a band like that could be a national sensation is totally off mark. Like,
Yes.
absolutely unbelievable, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think the other problem with it is that by the time this film comes out, bands like High Flying Birds and BDI are effectively the weapons of happiness.
They are, yes, yes.
You know, so
I think it was.
I'm not even sure that if we were talking about today's music landscape, I'm not even sure that the Alarm could pull off the stunt.
I don't think they could. No.
And I don't think they'd need to.
Yeah. Because we've just had a #1 album from Shed 7, which makes me
I
feel
know.
like Agent Cooper in the last episode of Twin Peaks: The Return, just, standing in front of the house going, "What year is this?"
This morning, as you know, we were both in the same recreational facility
Yeah.
in Stockton-on-Tees, and I saw a poster for a concert from Johnny Hates Jazz.
Yes. And Jazz
And
isn't that keen on Johnny either.
and together, Ian and I managed to name both their hits. Yeah,
No, it's true though, isn't it? What you say, that we've now flipped around to the sense that, to the extent that, where if you've got a heritage act with a loyal fan base, nobody cares that they're middle aged. That's actually quite a good investment. You can probably, get a good tour out of that. Whereas if you've got a band full of young people with skinny jeans and annoying haircuts who like playing indie rock, oh, you are fucked. Why don't you just sort of invest in NFTs? It's probably a sounder investment at this point.
that's it. And I kind of think, if someone if someone was lurking around the lower reaches of iPlayer or something and found vinyl there as a movie. I mean, it's not on iPlayer, obviously, but they found iPlayer.
Yes.
They found vinyl on iPlayer. I thought, oh, I'll give this a go.
Yeah.
I think it would do such a disservice to their any onward sort of curiosity they might have into the story that inspired it and all the rest of it. But it do a
Yeah.
disservice to Mike Peters' next tour.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It's also like kind of there's another way in which it's out of touch with the landscape it came out in, which is that when the younger band, what are they called again? The single shots. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's it. Yeah.
Not as good a name as the poppy fields, in my opinion, but let's go with
No,
it.
and the poppy fields. This is why I kicked myself when it got revealed that it was the Alarm, because if you look at all their albums, the
Mm.
poppy is the single most dominant image element
Ah,
on all their
do-
albums. Yeah,
That's good. They should have put that in. There's a detective story element to it then.
yeah, but that's the problem, isn't it? Vinyl is not the story of the Alarm's perpetration of a fantastic hoodwinking exercise on a
mm.
cynical music press. It's carry on up the charts.
Yeah, and I think you can fictionalize it in a way that's interesting, but this just keeps missing opportunities to say something about the way that the music industry has
Yeah,
changed, not just since the Alarm first formed, but even, in the 10 years, less than 10 years
yeah,
between the Alarm pulling off this hoax and this film being made, is when the single shots are doing their press conference and their lead singer, who may or may not be uh, Phil Daniels' character's son, is just sort of telling all of the journalists how massive his cock is. All I could think of was it was about this time, wasn't it, that the last Shadow Puppets were doing interviews where Miles
mm,
Kane just sort of like jokingly asked female interviewers for blowjobs, and it was like that did not go down as rapturously as this film makes out that it
yeah,
would. Yeah.
indeed, yeah. And the other thing is that there were so many opportunities for
Mm.
caricature
Yeah,
within
yeah.
this, because I think if you properly research the music landscape at the time, you could have a much better layered satirical
Yes.
piece, because there would have been two types of music press involved in that. There would have been two
Mm.
types of music journal. There would have been the young, trendy ones who turned up to do the whole video thing with their iPhone and nothing
Yeah.
else. But you'd have also had the Joe Wileys of this world turning
Mm.
up to retain their street cred,
Mm. Mhm.
chasing down the new, exciting young band and stuff.
I mean, ironically, Joe Wiley is probably a very dated reference point to do that with, but I suppose you can't exactly say a hot, well-known young music journalist like, oh, there aren't any anymore, are there?
Exactly. I mean, you could have had a vacuous Fern Cotton type character, I guess.
Yes, yes, you could.
Um,
Yeah.
Lauren Laverne, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, always up for some Kinnicky at a distance. I mean,
Yes.
Kinnicky are a band. I've resigned myself to the fact that I will probably not get the chance to talk about Kinnicky on Pop Screen, but that's fine. Just know that I love them.
Their star shone all too brightly and all too briefly.
Very, very true. Yeah, but it's true. What you're saying is that one of the massive gag opportunities that the film misses is that when the Weapons of Happiness have finished tutoring this younger band, it turns out all they've taught the younger band to do is act like embarrassing middle-aged rock stars because that's
Yeah,
all the Weapons of Happiness can do. And that
yeah,
could have been a fantastic joke if I thought the film was conscious of it at all.
yeah, yeah. Um, and you know, and the opposite side of it is that kind that kind of a biting satirical comedy also sometimes works best when it's got like a heartfelt side to it as well.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think if if ultimately the Weapons of Happiness teach the single shots how to be drunken, middle-aged, burnt-out rock stars, that's one thing. But if they do it through a process of also nurturing them on their instruments, showing them how to play the 3 chords with power, with passion,
put a bit
showing
of
them
School
how to
of
play
Rock
the
in there.
drums. Sorry?
Well,
Yeah.
it's a bit like School of Rock. School of
Yeah.
Rock does that fantastically, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's the problem. This is a biting satire that lacks both bite, satire, and any kind of heart. So
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not
sadly
aware
true.
with Sarah Sugarman's other body of work.
Well, the main thing I associated her with was Mad Cows starring Anna Friel, which is one of those turn of the millennium British films that I've never seen, but I remember like when I was eagerly reading every week's film reviews in the broadsheets. Mad Cows was one of those turn of the millennium British films that people came out of as though they had just been like they'd just seen war atrocities.
Right.
Film critics spoke of it in a tone of absolute burned out horror. In a weird way, I kind of miss those days. Nowadays, British films are usually very good because there's only 2 funding bodies who can make them, and they can each produce about 4 films a year. So they better be fucking good. I miss that time of like, oh, there's a new British film out. Oh, it's rubbish. Oh, it doesn't matter. There'll be another couple next week. Great days, and we didn't know they were there.
It's sad, isn't it, when a film based on a true story, when the true story is it's a nugget of solid goodness,
Yep.
and the swing and a miss by the film industry is just so great. It's unbelievable. You know, it was there to be knocked out of the park. It could have been a sort of the boat that rocked type, you know, British movie that got good reviews and got a regular slot on TV schedules. Few quirky performances. Bill Nighy should have been Johnny Thunders.
Ah, well, you see, he's already played his aging rock star in Still Crazy, which is a much better film about a middle-aged band reunion.
Yeah.
It's not Johnny Thunders, isn't it? Johnny Thunders was an actual rock star.
Yeah,
It's
Johnny
like
Thunders was
Johnny
from Powers.
Jones.
Yeah. Johnny Jones, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thrasher's the funeral that they go to, isn't it?
That's it, yeah. And Keith Allen is Minto, which I wanted an explanation of, but never got. Maybe that's good.
And that's the other problem. The caricatures of the caricature nature of the band members was too two-dimensional. I mean, it was beyond two-dimensional. It was barely one-dimensional.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it works because I think you can give Perry Benson a one-dimensional caricature and he'll get the laughs out of that.
Yeah.
He's just good at it, really. But yeah.
Just stand over there and play the nervous, clever one.
Yeah.
Who actually would have a plan if you bothered to ask him. If you bothered to sit him down and ask him to come up with a plan to get this chart hit, he'd do it. But you're too impatient to ask him because it'll take him 3 weeks.
Yes, yeah.
It's not as good as the performance I recently saw him in, which was... have you been watching Rhys Thomas's Kemp Brothers mockumentaries?
The first one was The Kemp's All True, and the new one is The Kemp's All Gold.
I saw a clip the other day, and it was... I think it was Gary Kemp gave his daughter something to drink, and she went, "Ooh, what is that?" And he went, and he gives it some kind of name. It's from fungus.
Yes, yeah. Well, that has a running thing in with Perry Benson as the long-lost Kemp brother who always introduced himself as Ross Kemp, not that one.
Yeah, right.
And he's very good in those.
Yeah. I might have to give that a go.
They're good. I really like Rhys Thomas's
stuff. It's shocking that you can only do that kind of sort of really broad, funny spoof comedy if you are best mates with the BBC's head of comedy commissioning as Rhys Thomas is. Like,
Yeah.
no knock on him. It's great
No.
that he gets these things made because he's bloody good at them, but it should be easier. You know, other
Yeah.
people should be allowed to do it.
Yeah. Oh, or he should be allowed to do it elsewhere.
Yeah. He should be allowed to do it more than once every couple of years.
But yeah, so it's yeah, I was so stoked when I saw that little snippet on 60 years of Welsh pop.
Yeah.
The inspiration for the 2012 film Vinyl. Oh, right, I'll dig that out then. Oh, it's blessed
Yeah.
me that it's only 86 minutes of disappointment.
It is. It's sharp, isn't it? It's disciplined
Mm,
in that regard and no other.
yes.
Yeah, I think that's that brings it to a close.
Yeah.
Don't know if you have anything else to say, Mick.
I don't. Other than if you have never ever allowed Mike Peters and the Alarm into your life and into your heart, I suggest you do so at least once.
Okay. Yeah. I did.
Uh,
I thought the songs in this were perfectly good. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
least of the film's problems. So yeah, maybe I will.
I mean, the album Declaration from start to finish, there isn't a bad track on it, and the Alarm embrace folk rock. There's a lot of Woody Guthrie influence in some of their work.
Nice.
I've seen interviews with Mike Peters where he claims he taught Bono how to play Knocking on Heaven's Door as well.
I suppose at least he didn't teach Guns N' Roses how to play it. That was the real crime.
Yeah,
Whoever did that, yeah.
but yeah, the Declaration album, there's stories of working class toil, turmoil, trouble, unity, strength. These are all themes that follow through all 4 of the first few studio albums, and then there's about 26 that you need to listen to after that from various eras. But and you know, every now and then I'll be listening to something on Spotify, and it'll come up on my release radar. The Alarm are out again, and it's never disappointing.
That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think everyone has to have their sort of their veterans from their youth who are still reliably knocking them out. Like to go back to Wales, there are good Manic Street Preachers albums, there are bad Manic Street Preachers albums, but I'm always happy for there to be a new Manic Street
yes.
Preachers album.
And going back to the fact that they were the first live act that I paid to go see, I was that blown away that that's what inflamed in me the love of live music.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
my one regret in my relationship with the Alarm is that a few years ago I saw a poster advertising when I was commuting regularly to Leeds. It was
Yeah,
advertising the Strength 35th anniversary tour,
right.
and I refused to go because it made me feel too old because that was the tour I first went to see them on.
Yes.
And then subsequently, I've since gone with my late partner and I went with our mutual friend Dom Nelson Ashley.
What a guy. Yeah.
But also, on the face of it, last person you'd expect to see at an Alarm gig.
Yeah, I guess. Although Dom's music taste always surprises me. You know,
Indeed.
even his released music is pretty dizzyingly multi-genre.
And we went to that, and it was at the Georgian Theatre in Stockton, and it was a cracking night. And the Alarm are one of those acts. It's sadly nothing near the original lineup anymore. But you know, Mike and his wife are the backbone of the band, and then they bring in whoever they need to beef up the sound. But it's a cracking night, and it doesn't matter whether there's 200 people in the auditorium or 2,000 people in the auditorium. You get the same gig, you get the same energy, you get the same passion. And I think, given his health issues that he's had over the years, both him and Jules have suffered from various degrees of cancers and whatnot, and they just keep getting the treatment, getting knocked down, getting back up. No, they don't support Chumbawamba, and they keep on touring and fighting the fight. And there's also a documentary called "Man in the Camo Jacket."
Ah, yes, I remember you bringing that up to me once. Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's a
but,
nice, positive note to bring things to a close on, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. Let's leave it in a feel-good place.
let's.
Yeah. But yes, we'll be back in a fortnight. If you want more Pop Screen, you can donate to our Patreon, www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where a monthly bonus episode that isn't available anywhere else is just the beginning of the delights that you will receive, including my Doctor Who and X-Files reviews, other writing on classic Asian genre cinema, on Red Dwarf, 2 podcasts that aren't available anywhere else. It's a big, big Patreon. You'll love it, I promise. But until we are back in a fortnight's time, I've been Graham.
And I've been Mick, and I intend to continue being so.
Nice.